Greetings one and all once again, back to Exploring Arda. I am your host Jackson, and I go through a bunch of Tolkien's works other than Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, and I almost forgot my own intro because it's been 2, maybe 3 months since the last time that we did an Exploring Arda segment. If I remember correctly, it was either Children of Húrin or Adventures of Tom Bombadil, but it was it's been a long time. For a lot of reasons, I've had a lot of smaller projects that I've been working on, especially on my channel, and the whole spooky season is done. But I wanted to do a bunch of horror, paranormal related stuff on the channel. So it's been a long time since Exploring Arda, and it's been a long time since we've covered Children of Húrin here. So we're finally going back to the story of pretty much Túrin's adventures and his bad luck throughout the whole story. Also, and before, I just wanted to before the story, just wanted to make everybody realize that it's gonna be a little slower on the uploads, just because I feel like I've been kind of neglecting my own writing. And as much as I love to read stories for you guys and investigate paranormal stuff, or more like research and more than investigate but research paranormal stuff, it kind of distracted me from what I originally really loved to do, because my true passion is writing and whatnot, and a lot of my stuff is either reading stuff or writing a script and then reading off of that. So my uploads will be a little scattered here and there, just because I'll be more focused on my own personal writing, and it's holidays. So basically from now through until next year, I'll probably be a little sparse with the uploads. So just kind of want to give you guys a little update on my channel, for the 10 of you who are listening who have been following me, the channel for a while, hopefully. So whoever was waiting for Tolkien stuff to return, here we go again with Children of Húrin, because that is what we're going to be doing today. So I'm excited to be back into the story. So yes, once again, we are reading I can never get the glare correct. The Children of Húrin. There you go. Children of Húrin here. For this one, actually, I'll be reading both chapters 8 and 9, just because they're both smaller chapters, and I figured I could probably knock 2 chapters out in one episode. So at least that's my hope, and I guess we'll just kind of see how it all goes. From the last time that we were in the story, which was that 2-3 months ago, we were at the chapter of Mim the dwarf, where pretty much Túrin and his company fall into the hosts of Mim, who pretty much gives them shelter and whatnot. But even then, it's misfortune kind of goes there. And even Beleg, Strongbow, the elf from Doriath, he actually ends up finding Túrin and his host along with Mim, basically. I think with Mim, he knows about him. And pretty much Beleg's still trying to persuade Túrin to come back to Doriath, but Túrin's being very stubborn. He's no. Even with this dragon helm that was brought to him by King Thingol, that's why it's been a while, because I'm blanking on the names. He's still kind of adamant to return. So that's kind of where we're at in the story right now. So with that long intro out of the way, let's get into the story here. In the days that followed Beleg, actually, hold on. Chapter 8 is called The Land of Bow and Helm. I almost forgot. I'm sorry, guys. Okay, now we're on to the story. Chapter 8, Land of Bow and Helm. In the days that followed, Beleg labored much for the good of the company. Those that were hurt or sick he tended, and they were quickly healed. For in those days the great elves were still a high people, possessing great power, and they were wise in the ways of life and all living things. And though they were less in crafts and lore than the exiles from Valinor, they had many arts beyond the reach of men. Moreover, Beleg the archer was great among the people of Doriath. He was strong and enduring, and far-sighted in mind as well as eye, and at need he was valiant in battle, relying not only upon the swift arrows of his longbow, but also upon his great sword Anglachel. And ever the more did hatred grow in the heart of Mim, who hated all elves, as has been told, and who looked with a jealous eye on the love that Túrin bore to Beleg. When winter passed and the stirring came, in the spring, The outlaws soon had sterner work to do. Morgoth's might was moved, and as the long fingers of a groping hand the forerunners of his armies probed the ways into Beleriand. Who knows now the counsels of Morgoth? Who can measure the reach of his thought, who had been Melkor, mighty among the Ainur of the Great Song, and sat now, the Dark Lord, upon a dark throne in the north, weighing in his malice all the tidings that came to him, whether by spy or by traitor, seeing in the eyes of his mind and understanding far more of the deeds and purposes of his enemies than even the wisest of them feared, save Melian the Queen. To her often his thought reached out, and there was foiled. In this year, therefore, he turned his malice towards the land's breast of Sirion, where there was still power to oppose him. Gondolin still stood, but it was hidden. Doriath he knew, but could not enter yet. Further still lay Nargathrond, to which none of his servants had yet found the way, a name of fear to them. There the people of Finrod dwelt in hidden strength, and far away from the south, beyond the white woods, the birches of Nimberthel, from the coast of Arvinian and the mouths of Sirion, came rumor of the havens of the ships. Thither he could not reach until all else had fallen. So now the orcs came down out of the north in ever great numbers. Through Anak they came, and Dimbar was taken, and all the north marches of Doriath there infested. Down the ancient road they came that led through the long defile of Sirion, past the isle where Minas Tirith of Finrod had stood, and so through the land between Malduin and Sirion, and then on through the eaves of Brethil to the crossings of Teglin. Thence of old the road came past thence of old the road passed onto the garden plain, and then along the feet of the highlands watched over by Amon Rud. It ran down into the Vale of Narog, and came at last to Nargathrond. But the orcs did not go far upon that road as yet, for there dwelt in the wild a terror that was hidden, and upon the red hill were watchful eyes of which they had not been warned. In that spring Túrin put on again the Helm of Hador, and Beleg was glad. At first their company had less than 50 men, but the woodcraft of Beleg and the valor of Túrin made them seem to their enemies as a host. The scouts of the orcs were hunted, their camps were espied, and if they gathered to march in force in some narrow place, out of the rocks or from the shadows of the trees, there leapt the dragon Helm and his men, tall and fierce. Soon at the very sound of his horn in the hills, their captors would quail, and the orcs would turn to flight before any arrow whined or sword was drawn. So, we're going to do a little bit of break here. So kind of getting back into it, the whole Wars of Beleriand obviously is still happening. It's still ongoing, obviously. And Morgoth's trying to, pinpoint his specific targets, which is practically everybody in Beleriand. And he knows a lot of places are a threat to him, but he hasn't found the secret entrances or the locations yet. So he's pretty much just waiting for somebody to spill the secrets, pretty much. And so therefore he pretty much brings or sends out all of his orc forces and go storm all these lands, try to take over some stuff. And of course Túrin and his company end up facing some of those orcs, but even though they're a small group, they pretty much can overtake a large number of orcs very, very swiftly and easily. So I'm assuming also at the same time Beleg still wants Túrin to come back to Doriath, because when he puts on the dragon helm, the Helm of Hador, his people, pretty much he's just like, oh yeah. He's got the helm on. All right, let's go back. We're getting to him, but not really, not yet. So Túrin still is loyal to his company, his men. And so they pretty much just kind of survive in the wild and defend and attack orcs. So, back to the story once again. It has been told that when Mim surrendered his hidden dwelling on Amon-Rud to Túrin and his company, he demanded that he who loosed the arrow that slew his son should break his bow and his arrows and lay them at the feet of Kim, and that man was Androg. Then with great ill will Androg did as Mim bade. Moreover, Mim declared that Androg must never again bear bow and arrow, and he laid a curse on him, that if nevertheless he should do so, then he would meet his own death by that means. Now in the spring of that year, Androg defied the curse of Mim, and took up a bow again in a foray from Bar-in-Danwith, and in that foray he was struck by a poisoned orc arrow, and was brought back dying in pain. But Beleg healed him of his wound, and now the hatred that Mim bore to Beleg was increased still more, for he had thus undone his curse. But it will bite again, he said. In that year, far and wide in Beleriand, the whisper went, under wood and over stream and through the passes of the hills, saying that the bow and helm that had fallen in Dimbar, as was thought, had arisen again beyond hope. Then many, both elves and men, who went leaderless, dispossessed but undaunted, remnants of battle and defeat, and lands laid waste, took heart again and came to seek the two captains, though where they had their stronghold none yet knew. Túrin received gladly all who came to him, but by the counsel of Beleg he admitted no newcomer to his refuge upon Amon-Rûd, and that was now named Cedron. Sorry, these elvish names are a little tricky sometimes. Camp of the Faithful. The way thither only those of the old company knew, and no others were admitted. But other guarded camps and forts were established round about, in the forest eastward, or in the highlands, or in the southward fens, from Method and Glad, the end of the wood, south of the crossings of Tiglin to Bar Arib, some leagues south of Amon-Rûd, in the once fertile land between Narog and the Maris of Sirion. From all these places men could see the summit of Amon-Rûd, and by the signals receive tidings and commands. This way, before the summer had passed, the following of Túrin had swelled to a greater force, and the power of Angband was thrown back. Word of this came even to Nargathrond, and many there grew restless, saying that if an outlaw could do so much hurt to the enemy, what might not the Lord of Narog do? But Orodreth, king of Nargathrond, would not change his counsels. In all things he followed Thingol, with whom he exchanged messengers by secret ways, and he was a wise lord, according to the wisdom of those who considered first their own people, and how long they might preserve their life and wealth against the lust of the north. Therefore he allowed none of his people to go to Túrin, and he sent messengers to say to him that in all that he might do or devise in his war, he should not set foot in the land of Nargathrond, nor drive orcs thither, but help other in arms he offered to the two captains, should they have need, and in this, it is thought, he was moved by Thingol and Melian. Then Morgoth withheld his hand, though he made frequent feint of attack, so that by easy victory the confidence for these rebels might become overweening. As it proved indeed, for Túrin now gave the name of Dor Quarthal to the land between Tiglin and the west march of Doriath, and claiming the lordship of it, he named himself anew, Gorthal, the Dread Helm, and his heart was high. But to Beleg it seemed now that the Helm had wrought otherwise with Túrin than he had hoped, and looking into the days to come he was troubled in mind. One day, as summer was wearing on, he and Túrin were sitting in the Achad, resting after a long affray in March. Túrin then said to Beleg, "Why are you sad and thoughtful? Does not all go well since you returned to me? Has not my purpose proved good?" "All is well now," said Beleg. "Our enemies are still surprised and afraid, and still good days lie before us, for a while." "And what then?" said Túrin. "Winter," said Beleg, "and after that another year, for those who live to see it." "And what then?" "The wrath of Angband. We have burned the fingertips of the Black Hand. No more. It will not withdraw." "But it is not the wrath of Angband, our purpose and delight," said Túrin. "What else would you have me do?" "You know full well," said Beleg. "But of that road you have forbidden me to speak. But hear me now. A king or the lord of a great host has many needs. He must have a secure refuge, and he must have wealth, and many whose work is not in war. With number comes the need of food, more than the wild will furnish to hunters. And there comes the passing of secrecy. Amon-Rûd is a good place for a few. It has eyes and ears, but it stands alone and is seen far off, and no great force is needed to surround it, unless a host defends it, greater far than ours is yet, or than is likely ever to be. Nonetheless, I will be the captain of my own host," said Túrin, "and if I fall, then I fall. Here I stand in the path of Morgoth, and while I so stand, he cannot use the southward road." Alright, I'm going to do a quick little break once again here. So Túrin, despite the ongoing attacks of the orcs and the raids and all that stuff, he pretty much is like, okay, like this whole region, this land, I claim lordship over this land, because I guess him and his company defends it so well, and he pretty much, I don't know, he has such like a fierce way of like defense, but also like attacking them too, that like Morgoth is just like, this guy is kind of a problem as well. So, and then of course him and Beleg are pretty much known throughout the land to be a threat. So the king of Nargathrond's just like, well, okay, listen, like, don't come into Nargathrond, but we can still help you if you need it. so for Túrin, it's going pretty well. I think this is like his peak moment, I guess, like, so to speak, like in his personal life. Like, nothing's like terrible. There's no tragedy yet. I should say yet, because the whole thing of Túrin's story is that it's one big nightmare for him. So. Yeah, so pretty much Morgoth feels threatened. Túrin is happy where he's at, and he uses the dragon helm for pretty much the dread helm itself. So instead of the dragon helm, it's the dread helm. So he uses it for, I guess, the wrong purpose, more of out of fear and intimidation rather than, I guess, just claiming it as part of his people. So more individual centered more than his people. So back to the story here. Report of the dragon helm in the land west of Sirion came swiftly to the ear of Morgoth, and he laughed, for now Túrin was revealed to him again, who had long been lost in the shadows and under the veils of Melian. Yet he began to fear that Túrin would grow to such a power that the curse that he had laid upon him would become void, and he would escape the doom that had been designed for him, or else that he might retreat to Doriath and be lost to his sight again. Now therefore he had a mind to seize Túrin and afflict him even as his father, to torment him and enslave him. Beleg had spoken truly when he said to Túrin that they had but scorched the fingers of the Black Hand, and that it would not withdraw. But Morgoth concealed his designs, and for that time contented himself with the sending out of his most skilled scouts, and ere long Amon-Rûd was surrounded by spies, lurking unobserved in the wilderness and making no move against the parties of men that went in and out. But Mim was aware of the presence of orcs in the lands about Amon-Rûd, and the hatred that he bore to Beleg led him now in his darkened heart to an evil resolve. One day in the waning of the year he told the men in Bar Indanwith that he was going with his son Ibn to search for roots for their winter store, but his true purpose was to seek out the servants of Morgoth and to lead them to Túrin's hiding place. Nevertheless, he attempted to impose certain conditions on the orcs, who laughed at him, but Mim said that they knew little if they believed that they could gain anything from a petty dwarf by torture. Then they asked him what these conditions might be, and Mim declared his demands, that they pay him the weight in iron of each man whom they had caught or slew, but of Túrin and Beleg in gold, that Mim's house, when rid of Túrin and his company, be left to him, and himself unmolested, that Beleg be left behind, bound for Mim to deal with, and that Túrin to be let go free. To these conditions the emissaries of Morgoth readily agreed, with no intention of fulfilling either the first or the second. The orc captain thought that the fate of Beleg might well be left to Mim, but as to letting Túrin go free, alive to Angband, were his orders. While agreeing to the conditions, he insisted that they keep Ibn as hostage, and then Mim became afraid, and tried to back out of his undertaking, or else to escape. But the orcs had his son, and so Mim was obliged to guide them to Bar Indanwith. Thus was the house of ransom betrayed. It has been told that the stony mass that was on the crown or cap of Amon-Rûd had a bare or flattened top, but that steep as were its sides, men could reach the summit by climbing a stair cut into the rock, leading up from the shelf or terrace before the entrance to Mim's house. On the summit watchmen were set, and they gave warning of the approach of the enemies, but these, guided by Mim, came onto the level shelf before the doors, and Túrin and Beleg were driven back to the entrance of Bar Indanwith. Some of the men who tried to climb up the steps cut in the rocks were shot down by the arrows of the orcs. Túrin and Beleg retreated into the cave, and rolled a great stone across the passage. In these straits Androg revealed to them the hidden stair leading to the flat summit of Amon-Rûd, which he had found when lost in the caves, as has been told. Then Túrin and Beleg with many of their men went up to the stair, and came out on the summit, surprising those few of the orcs who had already come there by the outer path, and driving them over the edge. For a little while they held off the orcs climbing up the rocks, but they had no shelter on the bare summit, and many were shot from below. The most valiant of these was Androg, who fell mortally wounded by an arrow to the head at the outside stair. Then Túrin and Beleg with the 10 men left to them drew back to the center of the summit, where there was a standing stone, and making a ring about it they defended themselves until all were slain, save Beleg and Túrin, for over them the orcs cast nets. Túrin was bound and carried off. Beleg, who was wounded, was bound likewise, but he was laid on the ground with wrists and ankles tied to iron pins driven into the rock. Now the orcs, finding the issue of the secret stair, left the summit and entered Bar and Danwith, which they had defiled and ravaged. They did not find Mim, lurking in his caves, and when they departed from Amon-Rud, Mim appeared on the summit, and going to where Beleg lay prostrate and unmoving, he gloated over him while he sharpened a knife. But Mim and Beleg were not the only living beings on that stony height. Androg, though himself wounded to the death, crawled among the dead bodies towards them, and seizing a sword he thrust it at the dwarf. Shrieking in fear, Mim ran to the brink of the cliff and disappeared. He fled down a steep and difficult goat's path that was known to him, but Androg, putting forth his last strength, cut through the wristbands and fetters that bound Beleg, and so released him. But dying, he said, "My hurts are too deep, even for your healing." And so that's the end of chapter 8 here. So yeah, a very, very climatic ending there. So pretty much, yeah, Mim, betrays his own house, I guess you could say, like his own hiding space. Pretty much is like, okay, well, Túrin kind of brought along this Beleg guy, and he hates Beleg and he hates elves, so he's like, you know what? I'd rather have orcs plunder and defile and destroy my home to pretty much kill off these, I guess, like these wild men, like the, whatever, I forget what they called them as well. Rebels, I think it was pretty cool. The rebels against Morgoth, it's pretty cool. But even before that, Túrin and Beleg are talking to each other, being like, okay, well, what do we... Well, Beleg is more of like, okay, what are we going to do year after year? Are we just going to do the same thing? And if we are going to do the same thing, and if you claim lordship of this land, you got to start, like, you know, upping your game, pretty much. Like, if you're going to be lordship of this land, you got to start supplying stuff for your own people. You got to have some coin. You got to, you know, have a good defense. And so it's like, kind of like Beleg trying to make Túrin realize that there's a lot more to just like fighting and defending orcs to be a lord over the land. And of course that's when orcs start to come in and Mim betrays them, and now it's only 2 of them left instead of like, what was it, like 50? So yeah, pretty much a secret sneak attack into Amon-Rud, and that's pretty much destroyed by now. So the orcs take over. Beleg is captured, Túrin is captured, and then Androg dies at the very last moment. But he does end up saving Beleg, which is pretty cool. You know, a little bit of a redemption. Part of his redemption arc is him saving Beleg, because he didn't like Beleg in the first place, if I remember correctly, either. So I think none of Túrin's guys really liked him in the first place. So it's nice to see. But yeah, so since we're reading 2 chapters, I'm just going to go straight into the next chapter here, which is chapter 9, The Death of Beleg. So, here we go. Beleg sought among the dead for Túrin to bury him, but he could not discover his body. He knew then that Húrin's son was still alive and taken to Angband, but he remained perforce in Bar and Danwith until his wounds were healed. He set out then with little hope to try to find the trail of the orcs, and he came upon their tracks near the crossings of Teaglin. There they divided, some passing along the eaves of the forest of Brethil towards the ford of Brithiak, while others turned away westwards. And it seemed plain to Beleg that he must follow those that went direct into greatest speed to Angband, making for the pass of Anak. Therefore he journeyed on through Dimbar, and up to the pass of Anak in arid Gorgoroth, the mountains of terror, and so to the highlands of Tar-Nufuin, the forest under night, a region of dread and dark enchantment, of wandering and despair. Benighted in that evil land, it chanced that Beleg saw a small light among the trees, and going forward towards it he found an elf, lying asleep beneath a great dead tree. Beside his head was a lamp, from which the covering had slipped off. Then Beleg woke the sleeper and gave him lembas, and asked him what fate had brought him to this terrible place. And he named himself Gwindor, son of Gwilyn. Grieving, Beleg looked at him, for Gwindor was but a bent and timid shadow of his former shape and mood, when, in the battle of unnumbered tears, that lord of Nargathrond rode to the very doors of Angband, and there was taken. For few of the Noldor whom Morgoth took captive were put to death, because of their skill in mining for metals and gems, and Gwindor was not slain, but put to labor in the mines of the north. These Noldor possessed many of the Fëanorian lamps, which were crystals hung in a fine chain net. the crystals being ever shining with an inner blue radiance marvelous for fighting the way in the darkness of night or in tunnels. Of these lamps they themselves did not know the secret. Many of the mining elves thus escaped from the darkness of the mines, for they were able to bore their way out. But Gwindor received a small sword from one who worked in the forges, and when working in a stone gang, turned suddenly on the guards. He escaped, but with one hand cut off, and now he lay exhausted under the great pines of Tar-Nufuin. From Gwindor, Beleg learned that the small company of orcs ahead of them, from whom he had hidden, had no captives, and were going with speed. An advance guard, perhaps, bearing report to Angband. At this news, Beleg despaired, for he guessed that the tracks that he had seen turning away westwards after the crossing of Teaglin were those of a greater host, who had in orc fashion gone marauding in the land seeking food and plunder, and might now be returning to Angband by the way of the narrow land, the long defile of Sirion, much further to the west. If this were so, his sole hope lay in returning to the ford of Brithiak, and then going north to Tol Sirion. But scarcely that he determined on this than they heard the noise of a great host approaching through the forest from the south. And hiding in the boughs of the trees, they watched the servants of Morgoth pass, moving slowly, laden with booty and captives, surrounded by wolves, and they saw Túrin with chained hands being driven on with whips. Then Beleg told him of his own errand in Tar-Nufuin, and Gwindor sought to dissuade him from his quest, saying that he would but join Túrin in the anguish that waited him. But Beleg would not abandon Túrin, and despairing himself, he aroused hope again in Gwindor's heart. There you go. And together they went on, following the orcs until they came out of the forest on the high slopes that ran down to the barren dunes of Anfoglath. There, within sight of the peaks of Thangorodrim, the orcs made their encampment in a bare dale, and set wolf sentinels all about its rim. There they fell to carousing and feasting on their booty, and after tormenting their prisoners, most fell drunkenly asleep. By that time day was failing, and it became very dark. A great storm rode up from the west, and thunder rumbled far off as Beleg and Gwindor crept towards the camp. When all in the camp were sleeping, Beleg took up his bow, and in the darkness shot 4 of the wolf sentinels on the south side, one by one and silently. Then in great peril they entered in, and they found Túrin fettered hand and foot tied to a tree. All about knives had been cast at him by his tormentors, were embedded in the trunk, but he was not hurt, and he was senseless in a drugged stupor or swooned in a sleep of utter weariness. Then Beleg and Gwindor cut the bonds from the tree and bore Túrin out of the camp, but he was too heavy to carry far, and they could not go further than to a thicket of thorn trees high on the slopes above the camp. There they laid him down, and now the storm drew nearer, and lightning flashed on Thangorodrim. Beleg drew his sword Anglachel, and with it he cut the fetters that bound Túrin. But fate that day was more strong, for the blade of Eöl the Dark Elf slipped in his hands and pricked Túrin's foot. Then Túrin was roused into a sudden wakefulness of rage and fear, and seeing a form bending over him in the gloom with a naked blade in hand, he leapt up with a great cry, believing that orcs were come again to torment him, and grappling with him in the darkness he seized Anglachel and slew Beleg Cuthalion, thinking him a foe. But as he stood, finding himself free, and ready to sell his life dearly against imagined foes, there came a great flash of lightning above him, and in its light he looked down on Beleg's face. Then Túrin stood stone still and silent, staring on that dreadful death, knowing what he had done, and so terrible was his face, lit by the lightning that flickered all about them, that Gwindor cowered down upon the ground and dared not raise his eyes. But now in the camp beneath the orcs were roused, both by the storm and by Túrin's cry, and discovered that Túrin was gone. But no search was made for him, for they were filled with terror by the thunder that came out of the west, believing that it was sent against them by the great enemies beyond the sea. Then a wind arose, and great rains fell, and torrents swept down from the heights of Tar-Nufuin. And though Gwindor cried out to Túrin, warning him of their utmost peril, he made no answer, but sat unmoving and unweeping beside the body of Beleg Cuthalion, lying in the dark forest, slain by his hand, even as he cut the bonds of thraldom from him. We'll do a little bit of a break here. So, Death of Beleg kind of comes right away in the chapter here. So, unfortunately, back to it again with Túrin's dreadful fate of him being very, very unlucky. The curse of Morgoth is ever going for Túrin. It's not a whole lot to really summarize. Basically, Beleg is in search of Túrin. He comes across Gwindor, who is one of the elves who fought in the Battle of Unnumbered Tears. One of like the biggest battles of Beleriand, pretty much, where like tons and tons of elves and men were killed. So he comes across Gwindor, persuades him to come and rescue Túrin with him, and they do end up, setting him free. But during a whole night storm, Túrin literally just becomes like shocked and surprised and angry, I guess, like filled with rage because he's been captured by orcs. So he thinks it's an orc. And so because it's like in the pitch black of the forest, it's night, raining, all that stuff. He's just like, oh, okay, well, we're gonna fight right now. But then, yeah, he's pretty much, it's an accidental death of Beleg, which is unfortunate because Beleg was he's such a good pal. He's a good friend of Túrin. Like you talk about some like good loyal friends. Beleg is very, very loyal to Túrin, and that's why Túrin is so angry with himself and very, very depressed after that. So yeah, that's kind of like everything what happens for that. This is always like one of the highlights, quote unquote highlights of the story is the death of Beleg. I think there's even like paintings that Alan Lee did. I think it's Alan Lee, if I remember correctly, or something like that he did with the death of Beleg. A lot of people remember it. So it's a very, very sad and depressing moment for Túrin. So he pretty much gets all the way up to his to his peak when he's lord of the land, of his own land, and then now he's just like taken captive, slain his friend on accident, and now he's back to his depressive state. So yeah, so on we go with the chapter here. When morning came, the storm had passed away eastward over Lothlin, and the sun of autumn rose hot and bright. But the orcs, hating this almost as much as the thunder, and believing that Túrin would have fled far from that place and all trace of his flight be washed away, they departed in haste, eager to return to Angband. Far off, Gwindor saw them marching northward over the steaming sands of Anfaglith. Thus it came to pass that they returned to Morgoth empty-handed, and left behind them the sons of Húrin, who sat crazed and unwitting on the slopes of Tar Nifuen, bearing a burden heavier than their bonds. Then Gwindor roused Túrin to aid him to the burial of Beleg, and he rose as one that walked in sleep, and together they laid Beleg in a shallow grave, and placed beside him Belthronding, his great bow, which was made of black yew wood. But the dread sword Anglachel Gwindor took, saying that it were better that it should take vengeance on the servants of Morgoth than lie useless in the earth. And he took also the limbas of Melian to strengthen them in the wild. Thus ended Beleg's strongbow, truest of friends, greatest in skill of all that harbored in the woods of Beleriand in the elder days, at the hand of him who he most loved. And that grief was graven on the face of Túrin and never faded. And kind of like before, that's literally like the perfect description, I guess you could say, of Beleg. He's just so loyal to Túrin, like literally. Yeah, truest of friends, greatest in skill. Yeah, it's yeah, a lot of people love Beleg, just for who he is and how loyal he is to Túrin. So anyway, back to it again. But courage and strength were renewed in the elf of Nargathrond, and departing from Tar Nifuen, he led Túrin far away. Never once as they wandered together on long and grievous paths did Túrin speak, and he walked as one without wish or purpose, while the year waned and winter drew on over the northern lands. But Gwindor was ever beside him to guard him and guide him, and thus they passed westward over Sirion and came at length to the beautiful Mere and Ethel Ivrin, the springs whence Narog rose beneath the mountains of shadow. There Gwindor spoke to Túrin, saying, "Awake, Túrin, son of Húrin! On Ivrin's lake is endless laughter. She is fed from crystal fountains unfailing, and guarded from defilement by Ulmo, lord of waters, who wrought her beauty in ancient days." Then Túrin knelt and drank from that water, and suddenly he cast himself down, and his tears were unloosed at last, and he was healed of his madness. There he made a song for Beleg, and he named it Laer Cu Beleg, the song of the great bow, singing it aloud, heedless of peril. And Gwindor gave the sword Anglachel into his hands, and Túrin knew that it was heavy and strong and had great power. But its blade was black and dull, and its edges blunt. Then Gwindor said, "This is a strange blade, and unlike any that I have seen in Middle-earth. It mourns for Beleg even as you do. But be comforted, for I return to Nargathrond of the house of Finarfin, where I was born and dwelt before my grief. You shall come with me, and be healed and renewed." "Who are you?" said Túrin. "A wandering elf, a thrall escaped, whom Beleg met and comforted," said Gwindor. "Yet once I was Gwindor, son of Gwilyn, a lord of Nargathrond, until I went into the Nirnaeth Arnoediad, and was enslaved in Angband." "Then you have seen Húrin, son of Galdor, the warrior of Dor-Lúmin," said Túrin. "I have not seen him," said Gwindor. "But the rumor runs through Angband that he still defies Morgoth, and Morgoth has laid a curse upon him and all his kin." "That I do believe," said Túrin. And now they arose, and departing from Ithil Ivrin, they journeyed southward along the banks of Narog, until they were taken by scouts of the elves and brought as prisoners to the hidden stronghold. Thus did Túrin come to Nargathrond. And yeah, that's the end of chapter 9. So, like I mentioned earlier, pretty quick, easy chapters to kind of go through. So, yeah, Death of Beleg. Obviously, Gwindor is literally helping out Túrin through his mourning phase. He's this, I'd imagine Gwindor's trying to lead Túrin, he's trying to lead Túrin, which is usually considered the opposite. Usually Turin's the one who kind of goes forward and makes his own trails, but he's kind of walking forward with no purpose, like it said. And I don't know, I just thought it was funny where it's at the very end where he's kind of splashing water on him, and he's weeping and mourning and singing, I guess. That's when he asks hey, wait, who are you anyway? At the very last time. I just thought it was kind of funny. But yeah, so Gwindor tries to comfort him the best that he can and leads him over to Nargathrond. And now Túrin comes to Nargathrond to pretty much just get a refresher, get healed, just take his time to try to mourn his best friend pretty much. And yeah, it's a sad way to kind of end the to end this episode anyway. The death of Beleg and whatnot, but part of the story, part of Túrin's unfortunate fate, as I keep saying, his whole life is unfortunate. Obviously it's cursed by Morgoth, so what can you do about that? Just keep going, I guess. And he gets Anglachel, so now he has the pretty much the cursed sword of Ale, the dark elf, who we met a long time ago. Anglachel, his cursed blade that he pretty much keeps and uses from this point on, along with the dragon Helm of Hador. So really fun stuff, really cool. I'm really glad that I got to be back into the histories of Middle-earth. I consider the Children of Húrin part of the histories of Middle-earth. As you can see below me, I have a whole set of Silmarillion based time-wise, I guess, first and second age stories. So for me, I love going back and reading this kind of stuff. So hopefully you guys enjoyed me coming back to exploring Arda again. It's been a long time, and I'm glad to be back because I've been wanting to, but spooky season kind of demanded some ghost, some scary tales. But yeah, now that we're here, we're back again. It'll be a few more episodes of exploring Arda, and it's crazy to say that it's at the end of the year, so don't know what I'm going to do for Christmas, if I'm going to do anything at all, but for this channel, but I guess you guys will see. Yeah, so I guess with the story, the chapters finished, just be sure to check out my channel for some further support. I would really appreciate it. I've put in a lot of effort on my channel, as you can see. It's not only, exploring Arda and Grim Captivation, it's kind of my own little projects here and there. My Orphan the Garden Wall project was really huge success, which was amazing. I'm still continually blown away that it's over 5,000 listens. So for me, that's a really big, that's my main video. I love it so much. And I also released a black metal album. I named it as the band, quote unquote, the band or artist name is Luthien, and the album was Tales from Arda. And it has 9 tracks. 8 of them are Silmarillion centered, so like some of the big stories that happen. And then the 9th one was just kind of like a fun, fun as in like lyrical. And so if you guys check that out, that'd be really cool. So anyway, so I just wanted to kind of do all of that because it's been a while since I've been on Exploring Arda, and I think with everything out of the way and everything being said just like that, just stay tuned for another episode, and may the light of Elbereth be with you all. Farewell.